So welcome everyone to our eighth reading um, for Bonding Over One Book, Harriet the Spy. Tonight we're going to be reading chapters 8 and 9 because the two of them together equaled about one whole chapter for the other ones. Um, our our special reader tonight is probably very happy to see me fumbling over my words. Um, the staff member knows everything about everyone, and she's super awesome. It is Miss Clark. You can. Welcome. So, um, last week we read chapter 7. Does anybody remember what happened in chapter 7? Okay, Vinny.
So they were doing a Christmas pageant, and they decided to be the Christmas dinner and show what they had learned over the years. And Harry got picked as the onion and was having an argument with the
Yeah.
teacher.
Did Harriet and her group of Sport and Janie, did they want to be the Christmas dinner? Or is that somebody else's idea?
Yes, and it spread to everyone. Exactly.
What's going on, Mackenzie?
She's stressed out about the math and being an onion. It's because she doesn't like onions. So she didn't want to be an onion, so she argued when the teacher said enough.
She did argue with the teacher, which we shouldn't do. Um, we also got to see Harriet doing some stuff all on her own now, too, since old Golly is gone, which was pretty nice to see happening. Uh, because it does show that she's learned. And yeah, does anybody have anything they want to add from last week to this week? I'm going to go with no. So, Miss Clark, take it away. Can't tell you. Oh no.
Is that better? There we go.
There we go.
I'm sorry. I know you said there was a way to show the book, but I couldn't figure that out. So
It's okay. Look, Vinny has the book, so we
okay.
can see it. So does Mackenzie.
Oh, great job.
Okay, go on.
When Harriet started her spy route the next day, she decided to visit the Robinsons first because the day before she had seen an immense crate delivered to their house, and she couldn't wait to see what was in it. The Robinsons were always moody right before they bought something, and this time they had been moody for a week, so she figured this must have been a whopper of a purchase. She sneaked up to the window. There was the crate. It sat squarely in the middle of the living room. How did they get it in, she thought. And then she saw it would go through the door with just about an inch to spare all around. Mrs. Robinson was running around it in ecstasy. Mr. Robinson was hopping up and down on one foot. A railway expressman was starting to unpack the crate. A crowning achievement, said Mr. Robinson. A joy, such a joy, said Miss Robinson, completing a circle. Wait till, just think what they were so excited they didn't bother to make sentences. The railway expressman ignored them. He worked steadily and noisily until the front section was ready to be pulled away. Harriet held her breath. The front panel came away, exposing nothing but sawdust. Well, thought Harriet, that does it. But then the sawdust was being pulled away frantically by Mr. and Mrs. Robinson, who had leapt forward in their eagerness, pushing aside the railway expressman. There, screamed Mrs. Robinson. And there indeed was the strangest thing Harriet had ever seen. It was an enormous, perhaps 6 feet high, wooden sculpture of a fat, petulant, rather unattractive baby. The baby wore a baby cap, huge white dress, and baby booties. The head was completely round and carved out of a butcher's block so that it resembled a beautifully grained pewel post with a face carved in it. The baby sat in its diapered bottom, feet straight out ahead, and fat arms curving into fatter hands which held, surprisingly, a tiny mother. Harriet stared. Mrs. Robinson exclaimed with her hand to her heart, "She is a genius." This was too much even for the railway expressman, who could contain himself no longer and said, "Who?" rather rudely. "Why, the sculptor. She is marvelous. She is brilliant. She is a white star in the filament." "Yeah, a dame made that?" he gaped. "If you've finished," Mr. Robinson looked pompously. Yeah. "Oh, yeah. I just have to carry out the junk. Where do you want her? It? Darling, I think the corner behind the entrance so that it isn't seen immediately. You know, then it will dominate the room from the couch." "It'll do that, all right," said the railway expressman, picking up the Excelsior in handfuls and stuffing it into the crate. "Just be kind enough to remove this without comment," said Mr. Robinson huffily. The baby was rolled into the corner and the crate removed by the grinning workman. Harriet left Mr. and Mrs. Robinson's holding hands and gazing at it in speechless joy. She went to the street and wrote in her book. "Oh, golly is right. There's as many ways to live as people," she says, "but it'll wait till she hears about this 1,000-pound baby. Oh, I forgot." She paused and looked into space. "When somebody goes away, there's things you want to tell them. When somebody dies, maybe that's the worst thing. You want to tell them things that happened after. Oh, golly isn't dead." She slammed the book shut, feeling something akin to rage. Then she got up and headed over to De Santi's family. Nothing much was happening in the front of the store, so she crept around to the back to watch little Joe Curry. He was in full command of an array of food that would have fed the Marines for a week. He munched happily. Harriet was wondering if the kids had been there yet, when suddenly the phone rang inside the store. Little Joe looked guilty and started to hide things just in case. When there was a blood-curdling scream from the front of the store, little Joe was so startled a piece of bread fell right out of his mouth. Harriet dashed around to the front of the store.
Ooh.
Mrs. DeSanti was being held up by Bruno in a half faint, through which she managed to scream as loud as a dying opera singer. "Oi, oi, he is killed. All is lost. Dio, Dio." "No, Mama, just an accident," Bruno began, looking helplessly to Papa DeSanti, who was hanging up the phone. "Dead, killed, truck smashed to bits, a collie. Dio, Dio, mia fiola," and she swooned. Bruno looked as though he might drop the considerable weight, so Papa DeSanti rushed to help him. As he did so, he said, Mama, the truck is not smashed." Fabio is not smashed. Nothing smashed but his head when he gets here. A fender. That is all it was, a fender. Signorio De Santi revived immediately and started to run up and down the store, waving her arms wildly and screaming in Italian. The customers stood around like frozen food. She ran up and down, finally gathering so much momentum that she crashed into the storeroom, there discovering little Joe with a whole cucumber in his mouth. Eco, not bad enough, stealing us blind, and gathering up all the food in one arm, and little Joe by the ear, she came catapulting back into the store. The family stared open-mouthed. The customers came alive and started to edge toward the door, feeling that this was perhaps too much. Mama, mama, tia, calmama. Papa De Santi, seeing the evidence of little Joe's treachery, began screaming himself a long string of frightening sounding words. But Papa, Bruno screamed to be heard. Where is Fabio? Is he hurt? Is he in the hospital? Him, he is fine. Evidently, what would happen to him? It's the truck. The truck is smashed. Papa De Santi managed to get this out and then went back to screaming at little Joe. Fired, you're fired. You're not running a restaurant. Suddenly, the front door tinkled, then slammed, and there was utter silence as they all turned to see Fabio standing there. He had a minuscule patch of plaster on his forehead. My son, screamed Mama De Santi and rushed toward him. You're hurting. He's hurt. Papa, look, he's hurt. And she flung herself at him with such force that Fabio was hurled back against the door. It's nothing, Mama, he said, smiling. She straightened up, looked at him hard for one moment, and then slapped him across the head. Your father worked with his bare hands for that truck. Work hard, not like you. Work hard, understand? The family watched this in awe, as did Harriet. Fabio turned red and tears sprang to his eyes. Mama, he begged. Don't mama me. You no son of mine, she raised one finger aloft to the ceiling. From this day forward. Mama, Papa De Santi interrupted, don't yet. Let's see what the boy has to say. Harriet felt wildly curious. Fabio shot a grateful glance at his father. He looked terribly embarrassed. He fidgeted in his pockets until he found an old, bent cigarette, which he put in his mouth. It hung there broken. Maybe thought Harriet, he couldn't talk without that. The whole family was looking at him. He bent his head apologetically, then began in a low voice. I didn't want to tell you till later. Papa. He looked up at his father in a very sad way. I just can't. I can't help it. I just don't want to be in the grocery business. It's not your fault. It's just to be stuck in the store all day. I don't. It's not for me. So he took a deep breath. I took another job. You what? Mama and Papa De Santi said in one breath. I took another job. The only thing is, you need a car for this job. I'm a salesman. He looked frightened, Harriet thought. Well, Papa De Santi looked totally amazed. Then an enormous, broad grin spread over his face. Son, you're working? Mama De Santi looked as though she might faint again. Yes, Mama. And looking at his father, he laughed. I'm working. Santa Maria, Mama De Santi fainted. Bruno caught her. Papa De Santi ushered all sorts of exclamations and then slapped Fabio rather hard. Harriet thought on the back, and the others gathered round, with the exception of little Joe, who took this opportunity to filch a piece of gorgonzola. Harriet tiptoed to the street and there sat down to write in her book. My, better than a movie. It's such a happy ending, I don't believe it for 1 minute. I bet that Fabio is up to no good, as usual. Wait, he didn't say what he was a salesman for. I'm wondering what he is selling. I must come back tomorrow to see what happens to little Joe Curry. Harriet went over to Harrison Withers. She looked through the skylight. Harrison Withers sat at his work table, but he wasn't working. He was looking out the window. His face was the saddest face Harriet had ever seen. She stared at him a long time, but he didn't move a muscle. She went across to the other skylight. There she saw such a strange sight that she almost keeled over. What she saw was an empty room, not a cat in sight. She ran back to Harrison Withers to see if she had perhaps missed seeing the cats. No, nor were they in the kitchen. She sat back on her heels. They got him, she thought. They finally got him. She leaned over once more to look at his face. She looked a long time and then sat down and wrote in her book. I will never forget that face as long as I live. Does everybody look that way when they have lost something? I don't mean like losing a flashlight. I mean, do people look like that when they have lost? Chapter 9. Harriet felt so grumpy, she knocked off work for the day. That night after supper, she tried to practice being an onion. She started by falling down several times, making a great bumping noise each time. The idea was to fall in a rolling way, the way an onion would, and then roll around in a complete circle several times. Then roll slowly to a stop on the way an onion would if you would put it down on a table. Harriet rolled around and bumped into a chair, knocking it over. Her mother came to the door, and she looked down at Harriet lying there with the chair on top of her. What are you doing? She asked mildly. Being an onion. Her mother picked up the chair off Harriet's chest. Harriet didn't move. She was tired. What in the world is all that noise I hear in here? I told you, I'm being an onion. It's a pretty noisy onion. I can't help it. I can't do it right yet. Miss Barry says when I do it right, I won't make a sound. Oh, it's for the Christmas pageant. Is that it? Well, you don't think I'd just be an onion all on my own, do you? None of your lip there, girl. Get up and let me see what you have to do. Harriet got up and fell over, and then rolled and rolled around until suddenly she rolled right under the bed, and she came out full of dust mice. Miss Welsh looked horrified. That terrible maid. I'm going to fire her tomorrow. She looked at Harriet, who stood ready to fall again. That's the clumsiest dance I've ever saw. Miss Barry assigned this? Miss Barry assigned the onion part. I'm making up the dance, said Harriet pointedly. Oh, said Miss Welsh discreetly. Harriet fell over again, this time rolling away almost into the bathroom. Mr. Welsh came into the room. What's going on in here? It sounds like someone hitting a punching bag. She's being an onion. They stood watching Harriet fall over and over again. Mr. Welch put up his pipe in his mouth and crossed his arms. According to Stanislavski, you have to feel like an onion. Do you feel like an onion? Not in the least, said Harriet. Oh, come on. What are they teaching you in school these days? Miss Welsh started to laugh. No, I'm serious. There's a whole school downtown that's probably rolling all over the floor right this minute. I never wanted to be an onion, Harriet said from the floor. And that's a good thing. How many parts do you think are written for onions these days? Mr. Welsh laughed. I don't imagine you did want to be an onion. For that matter, who knows if an onion does either? Ms. Welsh laughed up at him. You're so smart. Let's see you fall like an onion. Don't mind if I do, said Mr. Welsh, and putting down his pipe, he fell solidly to the floor. The floor shook. Honey, did you hurt yourself? Mr. Welsh just lay there flat. No, he said quietly, but it's not as easy as it looks. He lay there breathing. Harriet took another fall just to keep him company. Why don't you get up, honey? Miss Welsh stood over him with a worried look on her face. I'm trying to feel like an onion, and the closest I can get is a scullion. Harriet tried to feel like an onion. She found herself screwing her eyes up tight, wrapping her arms around her body, then buckling her knees and rolling to the ground. Oh, God, Harriet, are you sick? Miss Welsh rushed over to her. Harriet rolled around and around the room. It wasn't bad at all, this being an onion. She bumped into her father, who started to laugh. She couldn't keep her face screwed up and laughed at him. Her father started being an onion in earnest and rolling and rolling. Harriet suddenly jumped up and started to write in her notebook. I wonder what it would be like to be a table or a chair or a bathtub or another person. I wonder what Golly would say to that. Golly looked like a bird with teeth, but I think I really look like an onion. I wish she would come back. Harriet was so absorbed in her writing that she had forgotten her parents were in the room. And when she finally slammed her book and looked up, they were staring at her in the strangest way. What were you doing, dear? Asked Miss Welsh, in an ever so casual way. Writing in my notebook. Harriet began to feel nervous. They were looking at her in such a strange way. Oh, can we see? No, Harriet almost screamed, and then said more quietly, of course not. It's secrets. Oh, said her father, and looked rather hurt. What's the matter with them? Harriet thought. They both just kept looking at her. Is it something for school, dear? Asked Miss Welsh. No, said Harriet, and felt even more nervous. Why didn't they stop looking at her? I'm sort of tired, honey. I think I'll go to bed, Miss Welsh said to her husband. Yeah, me too, he said, taking up his pipe. Why are they acting like that? Thought Harriet. You'd think I was doing something very funny. Golly never acted like that. Her parents kissed her good night with a rather melancholy way and went out. She reached for her notebook and was starting to write when she heard her father say, Sotovius on the steps. Yes, it makes me feel I don't even know my own child, Miss Welch answered. We must try to know her better now that Miss Golly is gone. Harriet felt puzzled. She wrote, why don't they say what they feel? Golly said, always say exactly what you feel. People are hurt more by misunderstandings than anything else. Am I hurt? I don't feel hurt. I just feel funny all over. And by the time she went to sleep, she felt even funnier. The next day, she felt very grumpy again on the way to school. Sport and Janie came running up to her as she was going in and told her that they planned to practice their dances that afternoon. And did she want to practice with them at Janie's house? She said yes in such a grumpy way, they stared at her. Then when she breathed in a very labored way and said, don't mind me, they really stared. She went on into school, calling back over her shoulder, I'll be there after my spy route. They just looked at her. That afternoon, she decided to try Miss Plummer again, even though she knew it would be terribly risky. She waited for the maid to leave the kitchen and then darted into the dumbwaiter, her heart pounding so hard she was sure it could be heard. She pulled the ropes gingerly. They worked smoothly at first, but just as she reached the parlor floor, there was a terribly loud creak. She sat there horrified, not daring to breathe. Then she heard voices. Impossible! Impossible, Miss Plummer's voice came out of a pile of pillows in a whisper filled with horror. Nadine, Miss Plummer screamed to the maid. Nadine! A chilling scream faded at the end. Yes, ma'am. Harry could see the maid standing primly to one side of the bed. Miss Plummer raised up, looking like a bloated eagle. Nadine, it can't be. It just can't be, and flopped back down, disappearing into the pink pillows. Doctor's orders, ma'am. From the pillows. Confined to bed? And the tiny voice was lost for a moment. For the rest of my life? And a wail arose. Well, thought Harriet, feeling agitated and strangely in sympathy with Miss Plummer. She did want to be there. She moved a little to write in her book. Is Oh Golly right? Is it terrible to get what you want? I want to be a writer, and I'll be faint if I'll be unhappy when I am. Some people just don't think things out. At that moment, there was a querulous shout from Mrs. Plummer. What? What was that? Harriet looked through her peephole and saw both faces staring right at her. Her mouth opened in speechless terror. They had seen her. She felt everything stop as in a photograph. There's nothing, ma'am. But of course they couldn't have seen her. They couldn't see through walls. There's something in there. I heard it scratching, like a mouse, a rat. Oh, I don't think so. Nadine marched firmly to the dumbwaiter and pulled the door open. She jumped and yelled wildly when she saw Harriet. Harriet started pulling the ropes, but Nadine recovered herself and stopped the dumbwaiter as it started to move. Come out of there, you, she said harshly, and pulled Harriet out. Harriet flew through the air on Nadine's arm and landed in a pile at her feet. What is that? Mrs. Plummer shrieked. A child, ma'am, said Nadine, holding Harriet by the hood of her sweatshirt. Out, out, get out of here. And that's all I need today, a child. And she fell back into the pillows. Nadine hoisted Harriet into the air and swung her out the door and down the steps. Even though her feet were dangling helplessly and her mind was racing with fear, Harriet took a few mental notes of the interiors as they descended. There, said Nadine, pushing her out the door. Good riddance. And don't get caught again in there. Harriet looked back. Nadine winked at her. Feeling ridiculous, she started to run. She didn't stop running until she was at her front door. She sat down on the stoop and panted a long time. That's the first time in 3 years of spying that I've been caught, she thought. After she got her breath back, she opened up her notebook. Spies should not get caught. That is the one essential thing about spies. I am a rotten spy, of course. How was I to know she was going to do that? But that's no excuse. I knew. I just knew it was too dangerous to go there. She sat looking dejectedly at the park. As she stared at the black trees, one tear rolled down her cheek. She wrote, Oh golly would have had something to say about this, and also about that onion business last night. She slammed her book, suddenly terribly grumpy. She decided to go over to Janie's house to practice, even though she had no desire now to roll around on the floor. When she got there, she saw that Pinky Whitehead and Carrie Andrews were there too. She went over to Janie and whispered in her ear, What is he doing here? Pinky Whitehead is all I need today. I can't help it, Janie said apologetically. Carrie Andrews in the middle, and Sport and Pinky are the two legs on the turkey. They all have to be together to practice. Well, said Harriet, suddenly felt terribly evil. I don't like it. Janie looked at her in the strangest way. What do you mean you don't like it? I just don't like it, that's all, Harriet said in a mysteriously and moved said mysteriously and moved away. She saw Janie looking at her in a terribly irritated way for a few minutes later, but that might have been because Harriet had almost rolled into the lab table. Janie was trying to be a squash by lying in a sort of pulpy way flat on the floor. Every now and then she jumped a little as though the squash were being boiled. That's terrible, said Harriet meanly. What was that you said? Asked Jeanie from her flattened position. You look like you're burping. Sport and Pinky, who were doing handstands on either side of a humped up Carrie Andrews, collapsed in laughter. I don't know what you're laughing at, Sport. You look ridiculous. Harriet was in a oh-so-vile mood all of a sudden. Sport looked at her wide-eyed, then said, What do you think you look like rolling around like that? I look like an onion, Harriet screamed, and immediately thereafter felt totally frantic, as though she would burst into a loud baby sobs any moment. She got up and ran for the door. And as she was going down the steps, she heard Sport say, What's the matter with her? And Janie replied, Boy, what a pill she was today. Harriet ran all the way home and all the way up to her room, where she flung herself on her bed and cried with all of her might. That night she had terrible nightmares. O'Golly was rolling around on the floor and calling like a crow. She kept coming at Harriet, and Harriet would run. O'Golly's eyes were red-rimmed and shining blue. Her face had blackened feathers suddenly, and a big yellow beak with teeth. Harriet screamed in her dream. She must have been screaming in her sleep because her mother came and held her until she went back to sleep. In the morning before school, she wrote in her notebook, Something terrible is going to happen. I know it. Every time I have a bad dream, I feel like leaving town. Then I feel something terrible is going to happen. And this is the worst dream I've ever had in my whole life.
Good job, Miss Clark. Thank you so much for reading. Does anybody have any questions or comments about that chapter? Oop. Mackenzie and Vinny, you can unmute, sorry.
I wonder why Harriet had that dream, had that nightmare.
That is a very good question. Do you ever have bad nightmares like that?
Oh yeah, I had one a few nights ago,
Oh
and
no.
it was about me going to the Grinch's house.
Oh, no. Well, I'm glad it was just a dream.
So mine is, I don't know why Harriet was so sad. Maybe she didn't understand.
Sad about Golly leaving. Yeah, it was like Golly was her nanny, so kind of like her teacher that was with her all the time. And then all of a sudden she's gone. It's like, oh no, how do I live without this person? So I think that's why she's pretty sad about it. And Golly also understood Harriet. And we see in this chapter that Harriet's parents don't understand her and don't really know anything about her, right?
And then she got fired,
Yeah,
which is very sad.
it is. Anybody else have any questions or comments?
I have one more thing.
Okay, yes, Vinny.
Why did Little Joe Curry get fired just because he was eating food?
I'm sorry, what did you say, Vinny?
Why did Little Joe Curry get fired just because he was eating food?
Well, he took food when he wasn't supposed to, um, from the store, and technically that is stealing. And And unfortunately, well, in society, stealing is frowned upon and you get fired if you're stealing from the company you work for.
Oh, I thought
Yeah. Okay. I know there's a question right here. Yes, Miranda?
I drew a human onion.
You drew a human onion. Let's see it.
It's very weird and I don't normally look at onion. Oh shoot, I did the wrong thing. I did the wrong type of onion, but
You got to show it closer.
human radish now. Or whatever. It's like that. I forgot.
Very cute. Sorry. Lucy the dog is very very loud right now. And Miranda, I'm still on camera and being heard. I saw Io, are you there? I saw your hand up.
No, 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 no. No, 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 no.
She just wants your food.
No, 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 no.
I'm here.
What's going on, Io? I saw you had your hand raised.
My hand was raised because I was gonna say I like the reading.
I'm so glad you liked it, Io. I know this is your first time tuning in. Did you get to see any of the videos that have been done of the other chapters?
Yes. Oh no, not yet actually.
Okay, but you'll get to see them. They're on the PTO's YouTube.
Okay.
Oh. Hey, are we unmuted?
Do you want to talk again, Vinny or Mackenzie?
yeah. Why was the baby so huge and why was it a robot? It weighed so many pounds.
I'm hoping the
I
book
do.
will tell us.
But I thought you wanted to.
So why did they even get to that big 100-pound baby with a
Yeah, sculptures are art, and everybody's choice in art is different.
That's very true.
Like Miss Hogan teaches music and Miss Newport teaches drawing art.
Yeah, and Mr. Mendel teaches making
Creative.
art.
Yeah. Very good question. And it's nice when there's a whole different views on art because that's what makes museums interesting, I think. If everything looked the same, kind of boring time. Does anybody else have any questions? Comments? Besides the dog? Are you raising your hand, Gianna? No. Okay.
What happened?
Okay. Yes, Io?
I was gonna say that I like Miranda's onion picture too.
Oh, thank you, Miranda.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
That was very kind. Ooh, and we have another Vinny and Mackenzie.
So why did they have the things? So who said there's a choice? Everyone has their choice of art. Yeah. No. Why did the? Whoever said that should tell that to Miss Hogan. I mean, not Miss Hogan, Miss Newport. Yeah. And my second thing is, why did somebody thought there was a car crash? Has anybody wondered what gorgonzola is?
No, gorgonzola is cheese.
And have you been like drawing anything?
Ooh, good question, Vinny. Yeah.
I didn't hear the question.
Vinny was wondering if you'd been drawing during the reading.
Sadly, no.
No, it's okay. I guess Miranda must have known. Um, and that's why she drew, probably.
I will draw a human onion next chapter.
Awesome. I cannot wait to see it. Oh, anybody else questions, ideas about what's going to happen next? Or just ready for the next reading, which will be on Sunday night. And I will be joining you all from Oklahoma on Sunday night. So my room will look different. Anyways, I hope you all have a great evening and thank you for being here, Vinny. Yeah, you and I, yes?
Miss Lauren and Miss Clark.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
You are so welcome. I love that you guys come here. And Yuna?
You don't have to answer this question, but I'm just wondering, why are you going to Oklahoma?
I am going to Oklahoma to see my favorite band, and actually Julia's mom is coming with me.
Wow.
So be
Right
kind
here.
to Miranda and Julia this week. Their moms will be gone and having fun without them.
Wait, who babysitting them?
Their dads, grandparents, all the people, teachers, strangers, you know.
What?
Okay. Anyways, thank you all for being here.